I'm very happy to introduce now Reza Negarestani, who's an Iranian philosopher and writer who currently lives and works in the USA. He has contributed extensively to journals and anthologies, lectured at various international universities and institutes, and initially he was a lecturer in mathematics at the University of Shiraz in Iran, if I'm not wrong. He's the author of Cyclopedia, and I think the subtitle is something like Complicities in Anonymous Materials or something like that. Great book that you should not read because you should wait for another 2 months or so until the German translation is out with Merve. So even if you're like non-German speaker, learn German and wait for that. But in general, read the book. It's a classic. A very intriguing like theory fiction book, but today's topic will be quite different. His current philosophical project is focused on rationalist universalism, beginning with the evolution of the modern system of knowledge and advancing towards contemporary philosophies of rationalism. And while working on this ambitious project, he luckily gave some widely discussed papers on such diverse topics like ethics, aesthetics, both like on the discipline of aesthetics, Kant and others, but also very polemical polemical papers on the current like functioning of the art world or the art system. And also on a concept that I mentioned briefly in my introduction, the inhuman. Before I give Reza the word, I promised myself to not forget to also thank Barbara Topikov from the fabulous team of Susanne Pfeffer here at the Fridericianum. I'm close to like trying to become her successor at one point. Only if I get the team, of course. But Barbara Topikov did an amazing job in order to get the visa for Reza. For those who weren't part of like this amazing project, getting the visa for Reza, they don't know like what a fantastic work she did. So thanks a lot to Barbara. I didn't see her today. And anyone else. Yeah, so I'm very happy having him here. It's not a hologram, he's really here. It's not one of his famous Skype talks. And his talk today is like, at least that's what he announced, Frontiers of Manipulation. I'm very curious. And yeah, just one technical announcement. We'll have like the usual half an hour and then a Q&A. And during the Q&A, I will give signs to the speaker to just join us. And without a break, we'll just go immediately into the roundtable final discussion. And so please prepare your questions and don't hesitate. It shouldn't just be a kind of, well, it can be and should be a philosophical discussion, but not just by academic philosophers. So yeah, I want to encourage you to ask questions. Thanks a lot, Reza.
Thank you very much, everyone. First, I need to apologize for a couple of things. One is that I don't have a paper. I'm just going to extemporize, from a bunch of notes. And second, I haven't slept for almost 48 hours, so my apology for excessive pauses, between sentences. It's basically what I'm going to talk about is a continuation of Iain's, paper that manipulation actually is able to account for materiality. But what I want to do this is by way of introducing a formalism of manipulation. And for this purpose, I have to kind of, restrict the scope of, for example, the kind of materiality that we are talking about. I don't go to a very cosmological ramifications of this. So we start with this idea that one of the most revolutionary ideas in the field of modeling and intervention, scientific intervention, and also different tools of intervention and what they call engineering epistemology, which I will get back to later, is the revolution in the definition of the system. So in the last, I would say, 30 years, we have this kind of rigid system theory that starts from the Gestalt systems of, for example, the 19th century, and then comes to fairly a straightforward system theory of, for example, Bertalanffy and what system engineering is about. But nevertheless, in the last 30 years, the understanding of what system is has fundamentally changed, and that has allowed for unfolding of a completely different understanding of what epistemology of matter is and how can you really render the material intelligible. And I would say I will introduce this definition, and then I will briefly refer back to this idea that this is not a very new idea. This has been the case since probably the beginning of the Greek philosophy, from Socratic understanding, then goes to, for example, late scholastic philosophy, Renaissance, and then, for example, the modern times. So very straightforwardly, the new understanding of the system is that system is not about an intrinsic architecture. System does not have input and output. You do not need, I mean, it has input and output, but you do not need to interpret or understand the system in order to act on it by way of factoring in ideas such as input and output, intrinsic architecture, foundational dynamics, certain form of essence, analytical constitution. All you need is two things: the behavior and functional integration, or what they call functional organization. Now, this becomes important because functions, systematic or technical understanding of function is that functions are abstractly realizable entities, meaning that they can be abstracted from the content of their constitution. So a functional organization can emerge and can be manipulated, it can be automated, it can actually gain a form of autonomy that develop not because of the constitution in which it was embedded, but in spite of it. Hence, functions allows for an understanding of the system that is no longer tethered or chained to an idea of constitution. This is the functional organization, and the functional organization in the sense that system is understood not in the sense of rigid systematicity, but as a functional integration, and it has a system has stabilized causal components that are inferentially linked by way of, for example, these functions. And this allows for certain form of going back and forth or navigation between these causally stabilized components, namely mechanisms of the system, in order to escape from the straitjacket of whatever constitution it was supposed to belong to. The second thing was the behavior, and the understanding of the behavior of the system is directly connected to the understanding of what function is in a technical sense. And behavior is basically also connected to a notion of tendency in systems. That systems are sets of tendencies. And what are tendencies? Tendencies are abstract properties that are responsible for the behavior of the system. And you cannot interact without, you cannot interact with these tendencies unless you single them out, you identify them, but you cannot identify them unless you amplify them. So there is a certain form of intervention involved. Now, this identification of the system according to function and behavior allows for two things. One, a project understanding of system as a project of self-realization. And I said that this is not an old, new idea. We have actually, the origin of this idea is basically the classical program of ethics, in the sense that self is no longer under, self is a material, for example, for Socrates and for Seneca, or for the Cynics and the Stoics. Self is a material, and in order for know this material, you need to manipulate it. You need to construct it. Hence, it becomes the classical Socratic dictum that constitutes the origin of the ancient Greeks, ancient ethical program. It becomes that a philosopher cannot influence others unless it knows himself. But you can, hence the Delphi oracle, know thyself. But you cannot know yourself unless you construct yourself. Hence, self becomes a hypothesis, an object of understanding by way of construction, by way of manipulating it. Hence, ethics becomes a program of design of conduct that allows for the constructability of self, that is no longer bound to some sort of identitarian understanding of self, certain form of constitution. It's no longer moral, it's no longer contractual, but it is rational and destinal. And destinal in the sense of its self-realization. Because once you understand it by way of functions and as these autonomous entities that can escape the straitjacket of constitution, then it actually starts to self-realize. And then it becomes, you see, we see, in fact, we extend this program of ethics as a very initial germ of this understanding of system by way of manipulation. Once you extend it, you actually arrive at, for example, Chinese modern philosophy, Neo-Confucianism, like, for example, figures such as Xian Shili and Mo Zongsan. Xian Shili is a kind of a figure that belongs to 1920s, kind of. He mentored, a lot of neo-Confucianist philosophers who used Kant, but also they borrowed stuff from Confucianism, from cynicism and Stoicism, combined them together. And Xian Shili says something that the totality of the system is illusion. All there is the integration of functions. And this is really a revolutionary insight, which is, the foundational definition of, fundamental definition of modern account of the system, of what a system is. Now, this is the understanding of the system, and now you cannot understand a system unless you act on it, you manipulate it. Because the behavior of the system is coupled with the concept of tendencies or the abstract properties that they need to be amplified, but also functions are manipulable entities. The functional organization is about manipulation, and you can't really identify these functions unless you manipulate in the causal fabric. And then I will talk how this works, and for example, how engineering approaches this, especially a kind of engineering that has been, a philosophy of engineering that has been synchronized with this modern definition of the system. But before that, I would like to give a very brief introduction of, what materiality here is. You see, materiality is about a certain form of organization, a certain form of hierarchy. I understand that a hierarchy in today's continental philosophy is a negative word, but hierarchy is really the register of complexity in material systems. It has something to do with the stochastic understanding of how accumulation of functions and accumulation of a structure works. So it creates this nested organization of different hierarchies. So for example, you see in a biological organism, you have traces of inorganic that are not totally biological, but you also, and this is nested within the biological organism, and the biological organism is not physical, it's not reducible to the laws of physics. It has its own exclusive explanatory and rules of governance. You can't basically reduce biological domain to the physical domain. There is a unification should be made, but we do not have that unifying field tool that allows for this kind of reduction to be done, because it just doesn't work. Because physics is about, for example, organization of materiality at the level of proper physics is about optimization, or what they call geodetic principles. The law of the least action. For example, a river always runs across along the shortest path, the geodetic curvature, toward the sea. But you do not have this kind of optimization in biological organisms, because evolution is not about this kind of optimization, this kind of simple geodetic optimization. It's about optimization according to a certain form of ecological fitness that renders the understanding of the effective optimization of the laws of physics obsolete. Hence, for example, life is not effective. Evolution is not effective in the sense of effectivity of geodetic principles of physics. So this creates a certain form of organization, and these organizations have different strata that cannot be reduced to one another in this very kind of a straightforward leap between different explanatory and organizational levels. The same thing about materiality, even physical materiality. You basically have different strata of structural elements and functional organizations. And these functional organizations are, which make what materiality is all about, they have their own specific rules of manipulation, they have their specific rules of conception, they have their own specific conceptual behaviors. So, for example, that's why eliminativism usually is quite misguided, because you are trying to overextend the conceptual resources of surface phenomena, or macroscopic, for example, levels to the microscopic and atomic scale level. But by doing so, you are simply overextending one conceptual resources to another, one function or one rules of manipulation to another. But there is actually a discontinuity, a certain form of discontinuity between these strata that does not allow you to make this overextension. Hence, it requires a certain form of interaction with this causal stratification, or this causal fabric, or this organization and functional hierarchy. Now, the understanding of it starts with this the way that you can gain traction upon these various levels without overextending the conceptual resources and the rules that they functional rules and perspectives that are exclusive to these levels. You can have them, but you don't. But in the sense that you don't you don't want to overextend them. So how does this work? You see, in the classical modeling, in the classical understanding of materiality or material organization, models are constructed in the sense of infinite idealization. Basically, it has what is this infinite idealization? You have a physical materiality. You have a steel beam. You endow you get the surface phenomena, which is the grains of the, for example, the beam, the steel beam, and then you zoom in on it, and then this is that function of infinite idealization. Once you zoom in on it, you are basically, in a mathematical sense, you endow this zooming effect with a limit function that allows you to create a cross-level navigation between all these level of strata in this steel beam. But in reality, this has proved ruinsome for engineering. How does that, why is that? Because a steel beam, or any kind of phenomena, usually fits in three domains of hierarchy. One, what they call it the scale length. One, the macroscopic level, which is usually associated with the, for example, surface phenomena, affordances, that's like a solid, and it's descriptive. You can describe it by ordinary language. And then a mid-level, a mesoscale, a microscopic phenomena. For example, for a steel beam, it's a crystal structure. Then beneath this crystal structure, what you have is an atomic scale. Now, the thing is that all of these, the descriptive resources, the functions, the forms of intervention and the rules that govern them are completely discontinuous to one another. You cannot basically overextend the macroscopic grain to atomic scale, because behavior of the material will completely change, because even the concepts that are associated with surface phenomena are different from the concepts that are associated with atomic scale. So you can't really make a conclusion by way of conception at the level of surface phenomena and ramify its conclusions to, for example, downward to the macroscopic. This is, basically, so it rules out so many of, bad modelings that are around in the sense of, for example, certain forms of bottom-up hierarchies that you try to supervene, atomic scale or elementary particles, or, for example, particulate phenomena to the level of the upper scale phenomena, like, for example, understanding of the brain behavior just by way of, for example, its plastic structure, neurotransmitters. Or, for example, in the case of the steel beam, you can't just overextend the conceptual resources of the atomic scale in order to explain phenomena or the behavior of the steel beam at the level of the macroscopic level. The same thing, conversely, from top to bottom. So bottom up and top down by themselves independently are just bad models. They are basically overextending certain properties, and that creates different weak or bad interpretation of what materiality is and how it can be, how you can intervene with it and how you can explain it, render it intelligible. So what engineers have, basically, they do not want to just get a picture of a steel beam and zoom in on it, and then they say that, oh, as we zoom in on it, every property that was conserved on surface phenomena is going to hold up as we zoomed in. So they don't want to say that. So what they do is they need perspectives that are capable of dissociating, stratifying these different causal fabrics or structural functional fabrics, and then appropriately associate specific functions and specific concepts to these strata. So what are these perspectives? When I say perspective, people might misunderstand it as subjective perspective, but no, these are special tools. They are basically forms of manipulation or intervention. Now, how does this work? This works by way that what you need in order to go from one level to another, you need to understand it by how one level explains another level. This is what they call a causal and functional explanation. Now, causal and functional explanation is about, for example, let's just make a very kind of a rudimentary example. You have, for example, shadow on the wall, and you try to describe it, or you are trying to explain it. If you do not have a manipulation on account of intervention, that I'm going to explain what it is, all you do is just describing this shadow. You are not explaining it. In order to explain this shadow, you need to intervene with what creates the shadow. With, for example, this chair. Now, what they do is, and this has become, the standard of understanding of what explanation is, causal explanation is. They define explanation by way of intervention. They say that X explains Y. Had we intervened with X, Y would not have been produced. So, how they define this idea of explanation or causal explanation or functional explanation is by way of intervening with an account of invariance. Invariance is what makes this, allows this, continuity between different strata that holds stuff together. If you intervene with something, and under certain, for example, criteria, and the invariance doesn't hold up, then this is not explaining that. Then you need to look for another form of explanation, probably in another level. So what they need are these kind of cross-cutting perspectives, namely tools of manipulation and intervention, that treat invariances as certain forms of information required for rendering material intelligible, and also rendering its manipulationist, its constructive dimension coherent. And now it's interesting that, as I said, that manipulations at the level of, for example, atomic scale or the deep lower levels doesn't essentially translate to effects on the macroscopic phenomena. So you can't even overextend manipulation from one really domain to another. You need a specific form of manipulations that target a specific, for example, a strata of a material organization. And this is, you cannot develop, that means that this is where, for example, engineering comes into play, that what is really engineering? Engineering in this sense becomes an armamentarium of heuristics. And what are heuristics? Are not just a trial and error. Heuristics are basically devices of manipulation, are manipulation as a form of inference. What is in this inference? It's not really deductive inference or inductive inference. It's what they call material inference. Material in the sense that it is not abide by logical norms. It's basically non-formal. What Peirce, for example, calls it abductive manipulation. Now, how does this work is that what you need is basically a form of intervention or manipulation that is error tolerant, that is fallible, that treats the material as a hypothesis. So you can intervene with a certain, for example, patch of causal fabric to see what is really the conceptual behavior from this level to that level. What is the specific functions of this, and how these specific functions explain the functions on another level, without creating a rigid designation. Now, the way that heuristic works, the heuristics are about non-entailment. They don't entail something. And that's why they can turn the system or turn the material into a living hypothesis. That basically all you understand the material, you understand the intelligible constitution of the material by way of an asymptotically infinite manipulation. And once you manipulate something, which is the case of heuristics or these perspectives, it implies two things. One, heuristics are about non-entailment. What does that mean? It means that they do not preserve foundations. They do not preserve truth. They do not preserve axiomatic assumptions about what the constitution of this, for example, book is. They basically, what they do, as I said, they turn this into a fallible hypothesis in the sense that in order to render it intelligible, you just need to deepen the scope of your manipulation. You need to expand the scope of your manipulation techniques. But in the sense, constructibility then becomes isomorphic to understanding what this is. Because, as I said, they do not transfer foundation or axiomatic understanding of what, for example, this materiality is constituted of. They do not preserve that. They actually transform them. They are synthetic operators. Heuristics are not analytical devices. They are synthetic operators that they basically treat material as a problem. But they don't break this problem into pieces. They basically transform this problem into a new problem. And this is what the preservation of invariance is. Once you transform a problem by way of heuristics to a new problem, you basically eliminate so much of the fog around this problem that initially didn't allow us to solve it. Now, if the problem has been preserved, the problem, not truth, the problem, the constructibility problem, the intelligibility problems, has been preserved, then means that this problem now can be approached and solved on a simpler, more optimal level, because all of those extra, conflatory stuff that happened between different levels and made these problems difficult to be solved, now they have gone away, because we applied a form of heuristics that dissociated this content of conflation into different strata, and now we can approach this problem in a kind of a new way that allows us to tackle it. So this is another implication of how synthetic operators or heuristic manipulation works. Heuristic manipulation removes the lower bound of the materiality. And what is this lower bound? The understanding of constitution, the understanding of fundamental assumptions or axiomatic conceptual behaviors. And also, by virtue that it is hypothetical, its manipulability can be expanded further and further, means that it also removes the upper bound of materiality. It basically turns materiality, as I said, into a living hypothesis that can actually, its behavior can be expanded. Its evolution, its constructibility becomes part of the project of its self-realization. Hence the understanding that the system is nothing but its behavior, and behavior is a register of constructibility. The same thing about materiality and how engineers approach materiality by way of heuristics, which is rooted in this understanding of this new understanding of systematicity, by way of understanding it in the sense of functions and behaviors. How long do I have?
30, 35 minutes.
Oh yeah, sure.
You have 30, 35 minutes in total, but you use already like 30.
Okay, 10 minutes. So what one needs for manipulation is information about invariant relationships, and one can identify invariant relationships even in cases in which one doesn't know laws, cannot trace spatiotemporally continuous processes, or unify and systematize. So in order to manipulate a system, you do not need an a priori understanding of systematicity. As I said, the new understanding of the system, according to the manipulability, its import for manipulability, doesn't need an intrinsic understanding of what a system is. It's so-called systematic structure. You do not need that architecture in order to understand what a system is. Another thing now, and this is like a basic thing, that how does engineering work? Engineering usually uses just macroscopic level phenomena and uses its descriptive resources. This table is solid. All that I know is this table is solid. It's the level of ordinary language, description at the level of ordinary language. It says that it uses manipulation conditionals, if-thens, antecedent consequence, that are specific to the domain of ordinary language. If I push this hard, it might break under certain form of intervention. You see, an engineer doesn't need the atomic scale level in order to make things, and things still function. Now, in the sense that, but this has something to do that, you know, the descriptive resources of surface phenomena are stabilized, are really, you know, the ramification of stabilized of you know, those macroscopic levels. And that allows you to have, basically construct out of the nature of what materiality is. And science, in the sense for engineering, doesn't really change the, what materiality is, but the conception, the scientific conception of matter. Engineering uses scientific conception of matter in terms of fine-tuning its structure. But it doesn't use this in order to construct something. And engineering, yes, goes to the atomic scale and crystal level in order to fine-tune its manipulability. But it starts its manipulation conditionals by way of the surface phenomena. And then if a manipulable conditional that can be extended to the manipulation conditional of the microscopic, then it is a good manipulation conditionals. And then if the manipulation conditional or the descriptive resources of this bridging microscopic can be extended to the manipulation conditional of the atomic scale, then it is the really good engineering. But it always starts from the surface phenomena, and it navigates its cross level by way of extending of, if my manipulation conditionals, if my manipulation techniques, how much can they be extended to possible manipulations at a different level? This is what is the space of possibility for an engineer that is interpreted completely based on what manipulation is and how it can be extended from one level to another.
Thanks a lot, Reza, for, like, I think you brought up, again, like, several of the key, like, ontological or philosophical questions, like we briefly encountered or, like, had already discussions about, like, during the day. Maybe before I started the Q&A or open the floor, I have a kind of methodological question, and that regards the difference between, like in what you just told us, the difference between, I tried to ask you about how to distinguish different levels of your analysis or your theory. What's the difference, for example, between the epistemological level of what you said and the ontological, or a theory of computation or engineering theory?
Engineering is part of the what engineer is basically a form of transcendental realism, that epistemology makes sense of ontology. But for engineering, making sense of ontology is basically tampering with what ontology is. So the epistemological engineering becomes co-constitutive with its own ontology. This is what, kind of matches with what Iain said, that, the manipulation is actually becomes the very understanding of constitution in a sense.
I was asking it because you started with some, or at the beginning there were some ethical remarks, and I was reminded, like on I'm sure you know, like what Foucault was talking about is this aesthetics of existence. So my question was like about the different layers or levels of analysis, like how you transfer like epistemological qua ontological questions on a ethical level, or this, like what Foucault would call the aesthetics of existence, because like you talk about systems, and then you take Socrates as an example.
Sure, I haven't thought about it, but what I was saying was based on epistemology at the level of ethics, the understanding of know yourself. It's an act of epistemology. You need to know your intelligible constitution. Self, for program of ethics, is not phenomenal. Self is an intelligible constitution. Now, in order to understand this intelligible constitution, you basically construct it. You organize it. This is what really project of ethics is. Design of a conduct that manipulates what the self is, what intelligible constitution is. It constructs it. And this is the project of self-realization, for example, for ramification of the Kantian project in the sense of ethics, and then goes to the new Confucianism and certain program of ethics.
It was really just as a clarification. So you would say this ramification is like in principle possible for various different like philosophical disciplines, whether it's aesthetics or ethics.
Okay, I do not. I have to think about this, but I just wanted to. The reason that I went for ethics, I wanted to just emphasize this idea of engineering, that engineering epistemology becomes co-constitutive and integral part of making sense of ontology and making it. The main kernel of this idea is actually a philosophical idea. And this is really, the initial trigger of the project of ethics as a design of conduct. That, cross-cuts between ontology, between epistemology, between manipulation, between design.
Questions? Yeah, Sam.
Thanks, Reza. I wanted to ask a slightly less art-oriented question, but so if the intervention with or by causal functions into material and their co-constitution on their material level, is this performed exclusively in the realm of abduction or in the sense of inference? Do we work from finding a rational norm and then asking to see what can be done with it, or are we moving through materiality, especially with surfaces where we don't know the structurality of what we're looking at? Do we look for the norm using abduction, or do we follow from it, beginning with inference?
Yeah, yes. You see, the abductive inference is a form of material inference, and material inference doesn't have an explicit account of norms, and that's why it's called material inference, because it's non-formal. It's not classical logic. It's basically fallible and error tolerant. As you manipulate, you gather information. As you manipulate, you construct and render intelligible.
My question goes actually to also in the direction of Armin, because there's a difference, for example, between a beam of steel and the self, and there's a difference between the self and the work of art. And in the technologies of the self, the interesting thing is, which I think makes sense with what you just said, is that the technologies are incredibly different, from physical exercise to dream analysis to writing letters to your mentor, whatever.
Sure.
And then if you come to making art, there's always these two things. It's I'm making it, and I'm making it also to be perceived as. So there's different ways of actually generating epistemology and ontology at the same time, because it's dealing with experiential knowledge that the perceiver is implicated in, other than perceiving, trying to understand the beam, the steel beam. So I would like to hear more about how you make the jump to artistic practices, because that's a difference between a practice and intelligibility, let's say.
Yes, and that's why I did not want to mention the word art, because I think it's hard to overextend this field of engineering or even ethics as a design of conduct that manipulates self, and Foucault's technologies of self, or Seneca's understanding of design, of making things. They cannot be overextended, as you say, to art, but I think you can actually you can make a connection between them by way of a functionalist account of what they do. You see, in art you do not have intelligibility, but you have material inferences again. That's what you experiment, and you refine your methods. There is a form of refinement and tweaking. It's not pure, I think, is it really pure experimentation for the sake of experimentation?
But it's also from the perspective of the viewer.
Yes, true. That makes it even more complex. Yes, absolutely. Because art has a certain form of multimodality that brings affect, brings a stimulation of cognitive system, brings design, whereas those things are actually very much so connected to a functionalist account of what design is, engineering and also ethics, and different forms of design. But this brings back to the understanding of art that it's a multimodal, basically, friction upon, for example, material that entails certain forms of emotion, material inferences, and that makes the problem complex. This is something that I really don't have any answer.
Further questions? Well, we could just start our... Yeah.
It was more about facilitating a potential dialogue between Markus and Reza, because we started the day where to know yourself is to know your false beliefs. And then you were speaking of knowing the self as a kind of epistemic ethics. So I was wondering if that may stimulate some debate amongst you, especially you're talking about the fallibility of materials.
Yes.
So I just wanted to bring it like kind of full circle again.
Iain, you want to just let's take that as a...